Great. So as I said, we're going to be talking about this study that we conducted. I'll just kind of run through a quick agenda here and we can get going. So really, the whole point of this for us was to outline this focus that we had on this corporate security benchmark report. And since we only have an hour, I'm going to try and go through very high level, and we'll go through that. So we created this study in about the looking at the 2020 challenges, and we'll look at some of the top 5 today, and then we'll really look at some of the internal challenges from a team perspective. And then lastly, we're going to be going ahead and looking at some of how those initiatives for 2021 map to the challenges and what technology adoptions and what the plans were. And so we'll be covering some of the pieces of this report, but I will shoot a link to download the whole thing at the end. So let's go ahead and get going. Actually, before I begin, just quickly, I wanted to touch on exactly who Trackforce Valiant is for those that may not know who we are. We are a workforce management solution, and we're purpose-built for security teams. And so our workforce management suite consists of 2 real powerful solutions. And it really is designed to connect the front end with efficiency to back office intelligence. So on the front line, our guard tech solution handles all these operational aspects of the in-field tasks, right? So touring, incident management, visitor management, all with the command center that has detailed analytics and reporting. And then our back office application called Smartforce is designed to help on the back office side in terms of scheduling personnel and managing onboarding and maintaining employee records, as well as billing invoices and payroll, just with a few clicks. So these 2 applications combined are really a power horse that have helped a lot of other companies in security operate smart. So that's just a little bit about what we offer and who we are. And we'll go ahead and jump right into the research. So I want to just give you kind of a background on how we got to where we are and what we did to get this benchmark report. So earlier this year, like I said, we conducted a survey and we reached out to over 350 corporate security executives across a multitude of these industries. So you see up here, education to manufacturing to technology and healthcare, and many others. And we asked them about their top challenges, priorities, and adaptations from 2020 and 2021. And so when we kind of split out the demographics of our audience, the majority of those roles in our group ranged from titles from manager all the way up to the top executives. And the company sizes had a nice mix, I thought, from 200 employees to well over 10,000. So it was a nice spectrum there for that. And the primary focus of this study was really on the physical security side of the business. And so the majority of our respondents worked in physical security, and that's their responsibility, but some worked in both physical and cyber security. And then lastly, the sample group that we had a really good range of locations that they managed and a solid number of guards per location. So overall, I felt like it was a good sample that gave us the data that we needed to understand at least insight into the collective mind of these corporate executives. So hopefully you'll find the information as exciting as I did. I tend to nerd out on data. So, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 2020 challenges. In this case, I'm going to be highlighting just the top 5 for interest of time, of course. And, you know, I doubt anybody really wants to look back on 2020, but here we go. So these are the top 5 challenges. And so I think these had the most agreement across our respondents. So rather than kind of just show you this whole screen, we'll just kind of split it out and we'll go one by one individually, if that's okay. Okay. So the first and the biggest challenge that was cited in the report of 2020 presented health and safety protocols as a security function. And I would imagine in listening to every speaker, this really comes as no surprise, right? As we got deeper into this pandemic, the necessity for ensuring these health checks and temperature checks and the distancing protocols and monitoring all that behavior really, fell into the people who were on the front lines in the corporate setting, right? And so for this, the most part were the security teams. And not only did they say that the officers were maintaining necessary equipment and distributing the PPEs to the employees and the visitors, but they were also learning how to recognize symptoms, monitoring overall health and safety behaviors, and conducting mask enforcement. All these things, had to happen and had to be trained on, and they had to be a part of their additional security operation. And what we found was it's not even that it was had to evolve quickly in this situation as it escalated, but the protocols kept changing based on the different regulations that were cropping up in those early days. So there was a lot of concerns around how do we implement these protocols efficiently. So the next one is an interesting one, because I would wager, and I certainly was listening in, that the security professionals have built emergency prep plans and have processes in place for business continuity. And I would say that is in a normal crisis, right? But I think what this past year showed is that when there's something that is completely out of scope, what we would consider a normal crisis, some of the best laid plans just are going to fall short. And I think nobody really ever expected a global lockdown of business, and having the processes in place just simply weren't there for our responses. So for those that managed both the physical and cybersecurity, a lot of the respondents commented that the employees moving from to a work from home model really introduced new certain cybersecurity challenges that, ensuring that they didn't pose any potential breach or points for attack. And of course, on the small scale, all this is certainly planned for. But when you have an entire company go remote, there's much bigger risks. And a lot of the respondents, they didn't have all the plans in place, and just didn't account for this unprecedented situation. Okay, so moving on down the list, these next ones weren't as challenging as the first two, but certainly worth touching upon. And so if you think about the in-house staff shortages, we saw two things going on here within the sample group. So what you saw is there's first the shortages in terms of who could be on site at any given time, and who could work with the facilities. And they had to adapt their processes and leverage technology to fill the gap. And so you had distancing in place, and you had limiting the exposure of one officer to another, and having less officers on site to ensure that if one officer got sick, the other officers would not have the impact of getting sick themselves. So you had that shortage for those reasons. But in other cases, and there's been a lot of talk about this one as well, is you have reduction in staffs as business measure. We have to either people who are either laid off or they quit, they end up collecting unemployment. And as I've encountered with a couple of our clients and many security executives, a lot of them say they want to bring back employees as things are ramping back up, but they're finding that the employees are getting such a healthy unemployment check, they'd rather collect unemployment than go back to sitting a post. So it looks like now that is easing up, and you're starting to see some of these unemployment benefits start to come to an end, which hopefully means that that type of resources will start to come, those constraints will start to ease up, but we'll see how things turn out, obviously. And this one's fairly interesting, and and it kind of crops up in a bunch of times during the report, and it's around visitor management and improving the visitor management process. And so when you think about the role of the security as the gatekeeper for a number of facilities, and there's always going to be visitors, both planned and unplanned, and certainly in a normal environment, an officer could always just call up to verify any unplanned visitation. But when there are fewer people in the building and there's no one really to call up to, then what? How does the officer verify there's a visitor? And with a lot of these remote employees, there was appeared to be a gap in the ability to connect that critical function to minimize the risk of this unexpected visitor. So the need to adapt and bring in new ways to record and update and communicate visitors to the front or wherever they're coming from became important. Like I said, this theme just kept cropping up as we kept drilling down onto the survey. And then lastly, the respondents expressed need for better incident management. And I think, this is kind of a general challenge rather than necessarily one of the current or previous situation. But I think in this case, when you had fewer resources, more remote staff, more remote supervisory staff, you want to make sure that the officers were creating accurate and concise incident reports. And that's always going to be critical to the entire picture, right? You don't want to eliminate the ability to have officers putting in free text and categorizing the incident, but you do want to maximize the amount of predefined categories for the officer, common standardized way to record, and even being able to use technology to use media or diagrams, and even having GPS if they're using mobile devices. And there's really two reasons for this. One, it reduces the subjectivity or vagueness of that event, right? The officers are all using the common vocabulary that states the incident in that predefined terms. But the second reason is really that having that common taxonomy of categories, drop downs, and processes around incidents enables the corporate executive for better reporting on those incidents. The data is ultimately cleaner, it's normalized. And so when you're reporting on a common set of data points, it really helps to uncover any more risks that you may have. And it allows you to look at other potential risks in similar facilities, right? So an incident in one facility could be an improvement opportunity in another facility that may have the same conditions or may have had the same potential risks. So there's kind of a quick review of those top 5 overall challenges. The next kind of critical data point or greatest hits data point that we went through centered around looking at the internal teams and kind of what was needed to improve for their people. And I think this kind of is an interesting kind of area that because we just were talking about talent management. It's kind of an interesting kind of data point. So two things really popped out. So the first one was employee training. And so 45 of our respondents said they really need to implement a better process for team training. And so in kind of drilling down on that, what we found is that, when you encounter these situations where you had these new protocols to be implemented, and then the changes in regulations force further real-time changes to those protocols, and then the new set of health and safety regulations started to grow on top of that, this exposed a lot of gaps in having more consistent real-time training processes to ensure everybody's trained quickly and is knowledgeable in those materials in the right way. And without this, there can always be, you have confusion, you might have errors, and there's a lot of inherent risk in losing control over that process. So very interesting to hear how they were approaching this. The second one is showing that about 34% of the respondents said that they needed to ensure that their team members had more accountability. And so, again, bringing that accountability theme back up. And so, in addition, the supervisory roles needed to have also visibility into the overall operation. And so there's kind of 2 points there to unpack, right? You have a lot of officers now sitting a post, often on their own or limited resources, less maybe direction from supervisors that might not be on site at that point. So you want to give them the empowerment and the tools to demonstrate accountability, to do the tours, to record those incidents, to do the activity reports, and maintain that new set of health and safety protocols. And these are all added responsibilities that they have to pick up. But at the same time, the supervisory role and any of those people who are looking at the operation at an aggregate level, they want to make sure they have a single source of control, and they could see from a top-down view into all the operations. So if you have a supervisor who's managing multiple facilities, how can they see what's going on, get reports in real time? How can they be notified when a scheduled tour is being conducted or when there is an incident that needs attention? So these all led to kind of more real-time visibility around different controls within the operation. Okay. Whew. That was 2020, folks. So we put that into the rearview mirror, and then we looked forward to this year, right? And so the next phase of the report kind of looked at the 2021 priorities for corporate security professionals. What are the initiatives that are being worked on in the current year? So let's just jump right in and take a look at what they said. So again, I'm going to take a similar approach. I'm going to take the top 5 again, right? And what I think is interesting before we kind of unpack some of these priorities is the percentages, right? If you were to go back into the challenges, you see there's probably about between 40-60 range of significant challenges in the study. But here, these all represent what we asked they would say is a major priority for 2021 to the respondents. And there's a lot of aspirational folks out there. They want to get things done, which is very encouraging. So you see this 90s and 80s right here. So I'm going to break this down just a little bit different for the sake of time and just kind of going through the same thing. So the three ones that are highlighted here are basically mirroring the challenges that we saw in the earlier slides, right? So health and safety protocols were a challenge. So was emergency prep, as well as better incident management. So when you look at these three, it's pretty logical, right? That when you ask the respondents what you want to prioritize in 2021, it's going to be the things they cited as challenges. So I'm going to leave these here. We already know about these, so we can go ahead and spend a little bit more time on these other two, which I think are really fascinating. Okay, so these two kind of really are interesting because they were different than some of the challenges that came out, and it definitely kind of ties into some of the things that have been discussed during the day, which is great. The first one here is around conducting risk assessments and audits, and for this one, it's again, you listen to Brooks talking about it as well. I think it's a really smart and proactive approach to looking at potential failure points and getting out in front of them. And I've been hearing more and more security professionals, talk about adopting risk management strategies similar to other areas of the business have been doing it. So, you look at compliance, GRC, health and safety, quality groups, they all have different risk methodologies. And so they're using tools like risk matrices and building risk teams and looking at different models to quantify their risks, create action plans, and then analyze other facilities that have similar risk. So we just actually recently wrote an article about how building a simple risk matrix can really give you the ideas to how to quantify risk and then test that risk against real world cases, and it gives you extra tools. So I think it's very interesting to see that risk management is a top priority within these corporate respondents here. Okay, so the other one is workplace violence training, and so there's actually a site that that you should all check out. It's called thinkurity.com. They recently did a 2-part webinar series on the security role and workplace violence, and it provides real tangible takeaways. And I'll drop the links in the chat after this is all done. But one thing I also noticed was recently or last year, a study by the CDC was done around the pandemic, mental illness, substance abuse. And it said 40% of those asked said that they did experience some level of mental illness or substance abuse as a result of isolation, working from home, not interacting with other humans. And so one of the members of that, ASIS, kind of had opined on this, and he was saying, now we're starting to see much of the workforce returning to offices, and those potential mental issues or substance issues still remain. And so when you start to bring back a workforce that's been isolated and now they're back together, there's obviously high potential for workplace violence, right? There's things that can escalate. You don't want it to, but it's possible. And so security not only becomes now seen in the role that it once was, and I think we've all been kind of discussing this today, security has become now the protector, it's become the health and safety officer, and now it's becoming aware and vigilant on employee well-being. So identifying these potential threats within the workforce is just another role to be played within the team. Okay. So we're moving on to the last section of our journey through corporate security benchmarking, and those last two are really interesting. But I think going into the last part here, we really wanted to find out technology. What was technology? Were part of the pivot, part of the new normal that we were entering into, and so we asked what tools were already in place. And what tools are you planning to implement in 2021? And like I said earlier, this study was predominantly centered around physical security. So you'll notice that most of the tech options that kind of came out of it were more on the physical side and supporting the physical side of the business. Okay, so here it is. It's a bit of an eye chart. So what I ended up doing was two things here. Is I sorted this by the total percentage of what was already implemented, or what I'll call the already haves, in blue, and then the yellow ones, which are 2021 implementations, or what I'll call the gonna gets in yellow. And so I can actually broke it down a little bit further than that. So looking at the top of the chart, right? These are what I like to call the standard tech set, right? These are the tools that our respondents, and I'm sure everybody who is in the space already have, right? It's already in the operation. This is where the majority of that already have bucket is. And so you look at these tools, access control, what do we got? Access control, alarm systems, CCTV, they're all pretty standard stuff here. And so I'd say the only one here that was kind of on the bubble for me when kind of splitting it out this way was incident reporting. And I think a lot of folks have it. I think there's a lot of the respondents had it, but I think based on the earlier findings, it's something that they want to have improved. So you see kind of some more movement there. There's actually a piece I'll send in the links as well about bulletproof incident reporting, which kind of shoots off templates and how changing just a few things in the process really can get you that normalized reportable incident pieces. So okay, so that's the standard set. Now let's flip it over. Now looking at the tech below, there's what I would call the emerging technologies, right? So, and maybe for some it's not as emerging, but when you look at what the swings are, they're big swings in these gonna gets, right? So at the top we have visitor management. Again, I thought this was kind of on the bubble, but I think it skewed more to the gonna gets. So I put it in this one, and again, the reason also is because we saw it popping up over and over again as a challenge, and security executives want to make sure that they have that piece in place and building more visitor management. And even what Ray Secure was talking about with the UPS truck, I thought was fascinating. It's just having kind of more visibility into the planned, unplanned, and the things that you don't think about as much. It's important, and I think it's pretty interesting. Yeah, so the next few sets of tools, like real-time dashboards, the GSOC, digital post orders and logbooks, these are all about visibility, accountability, control, reporting. Even you look at tools like guard tour management, touch on accountability. It touches on all those pieces. Command centers and real-time reporting centers all are about taking that frontline pieces that are coming in and verifying it, creating that visibility and control that these teams are looking for. And so you're seeing a shift in these emerging tools to providing that deep real-time connection to what's going on in the field against what we can analyze and also what we can action to mitigate risk. And so, in the end here, it's when you think about it, it's a cool way to see how these challenges and these priorities from before are mapping into the implementation of tools. So it really kind of takes that whole story from the research. It takes that people, process, technology, methodology, and brings it all together real nicely. So that's the highlights of this report. And so I thought it would be encouraging for everybody to just kind of check it out. And I hope you found it interesting. I certainly did. And just it is a sample set, right? So we got 350 executives. We got a great sample set, but everybody has their own priorities. And it's good to take a step back and see what your peers are saying and validate your own journey. So again, I have the link here. I'll drop it in the chat, but yeah, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and we can have a little chat. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks very much. We've got a few questions. Let me see if I can take them in order. Patty says, how can we develop a common language? I think that was between security functions.
So probably a common language in the incident, I would imagine, is what probably the question was for, because we talked about that. So it's really about building out a taxonomy of, if you think about, incident types, or I always use the example is like the door was closed and the door was broken open. So I made sure it was closed and I entered a maintenance report. Being able to have a little bit more granular detail and kind of doing drop downs and having categories of the incident type and always having the same type of incident. So it's always recorded the same way, the same type of process and inspection, what you're kind of looking for, what kind of damage it is, potentially having those pieces all be the same, no matter whether you're handwriting it down or you're using a mobile device, whatever it is, being able to have the exact same language for how you're describing an incident helps for categorizing when you're reporting on it, right? So when a manager or executive is trying to look at what an incident reports across the entire landscape of their security operation, being able to see, how many of these were vehicle damage and what type of vehicle damage was it? Was it related to something that might have been, placing a camera in a different area might have been a preventative maintenance, a preventative action. So that's really kind of the idea of just kind of that commonality of what you can do. That doesn't mean that an officer doesn't have the ability, or shouldn't have the ability to have free-form text, right? So there's always going to be that kind of element of qualitative. We need the tangible kind of reports in the way that is. But I think when you look at it from a reporting aspect, being more standardized is more important.
I like that. And sort of following up from that, Carlos says, Tim, how do we become more proactive when it comes to training and accountability? Technology is the future. How do we get there? And then he follows it up and he says, how do we educate our guards to be proactive in discovering possible workplace violence situations? So I suppose it's a two-parter.
Yeah. So, I mean, so when you think about being more proactive in training, in training, the always challenge with any security operation and where we are now is that not everybody is always in the same place at the same time. So how do you push training out to officers in real time? How do you get them to know what the latest training records are? How can you use technology potentially to help with that? How can we push information out and having that kind of internal communication link where new training can be done? So a lot of clients that we encounter are using tools with media and pushing out videos of best practices, getting those trainings out in real time when you can't get to them into a classroom, into a conference room to update them. How do you update them? And using technology is super helpful. You know, and then to go on to Carlos with the workplace violence, that's a different type of training, right? So that is you know, you look at some of the tactical training that, you know, officers undergo, you look at some of the health and safety training, and those are very much see it and it's perfectly evident, right? You know, if there's something broken in a facility that looks like it might be an investigative area that needs an incident, you know, how to do a health and safety protocol. How do you identify a potential person who might be exhibiting signs of being unwell mentally, being, you know, seeing, you know, those types of conditions. And so it becomes kind of a very interesting kind of dynamic and challenge. And so teaching guards to at least recognize certain signs or recognize certain things and looking at incidents that may have occurred that might be able to be look at that might be escalated over time and trying to figure out de-escalation techniques. Those are the things that now are becoming part of the training. And so, and to kind of, you know, dovetail on kind of something that I know Carlos talks a lot about is security becomes a very, I'll say customer centric, but it becomes, you have to be very humanized and have really understand that either the employees in the workforce or anybody in there are all humans that are being, you know, protected. And we all have to kind of recognize what those different kind of triggers are that they need to be trained on.
No, I like that. And those triggers, and I think triggers is one of the key words, which hopefully we can also address throughout today. We've got nice comments. Carlos says all good points. Scott says excellent presentation. Bob has been celebrating with balloons and claps, and that's really good. How should people reach out to Trackforce Valiant then?
So I will actually throw this link a couple links into the chat and into the Discord for you. Certainly go ahead and visit us at trackforce.com. We have tons of resources. Like I said, I put out a ton of resources, and I'll send them all in these links so everybody can get a copy and check it out. Really, just, you know, feel free to visit us, and I will send links so that everybody can get in contact. Great.
Well, you know, Timothy, thanks for being such a great presenter. Please give Timothy a big round of applause. We look forward to seeing you in the audience, and thanks for Trackforce Valiant for supporting us.
Thank you. I appreciate being given the opportunity. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Okay.